Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Talk of the Class podcast. I'm here again, your host, Bryce Brown, as I guide you on this education journey as we look at some of the key issues facing public educators and public education across the nation, and look to come up with some solutions potentially for some of these challenges that are facing our teachers. We'll also want to highlight some great things that teachers are doing in classrooms, provide tips for what teachers can be doing to help themselves be more successful in the classroom, and just taking kind of a holistic look at public education as a whole. Before we get started with today's show, I did want to remind everyone to make sure to check us out on all social media channels at Talk of the Class Podcast. You can find us at Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all under Talk of the Class Podcast. You can also support us at the Patreon account for our community members who want to help support the podcast. You can join for $5 a month at patreon.com/Talk of the Class Podcast. If you support, like I said, it's only $5 a month, and you will get access to a monthly newsletter. You'll get bonus content, and you'll also have an opportunity to share links to your own Teachers Pay Teachers pages, your Etsy pages, anything that you teachers are doing out there as your side hustle, because as I mentioned in previous episodes, I know you've all got a side hustle. We've got to do what we've got to do to get by as teachers. I'm no different, and I know most of you are probably doing the same thing. So again, $5 a month. Gets you access to the Patreon community and all of those bonus benefits. Today, we are going to be looking at possibly our first real hot button topic that we've covered so far, and that is going to be the mass exodus of classroom teachers who have been leaving the classroom over the last few years for reasons other than retirement. So obviously, we have teachers that retire every year. That's just a part of the process. What we're focusing on today are the teachers that are leaving for reasons other than retirement. There are, some key catalysts that are causing teachers to kind of go in a different direction, think about a new profession, or maybe if they are retiring well before the time that they had initially planned on doing so. At various points in my career, I've seen some regional teacher shortages or some shortages in key content areas, math, high school science, and special education. But what we're seeing right now is somewhat unprecedented. The sheer volume of teacher vacancies across the nation is something that I don't think we've ever seen before. We certainly haven't seen in my time paying close attention to education. And so we want to take a look at why teachers are leaving in droves, and maybe some things that could be done differently by school districts or by state legislatures to maybe curb this problem. I don't know that you're going to fix it 100%. I do think that you will always have a fair amount of teacher turnover simply because what the view of being a teacher is versus what it actually ends up being. There's sometimes a disconnect there, and so you're going to have people that get in thinking that education is one thing, and they'll find that it's something different, but really needing to do something to change the current trajectory that we're on, and that's what the focus will be today. So again, make sure you follow us, like, subscribe on our YouTube page, follow us, and like our social channels. And I hope you enjoy the show. So unless you've been living under a rock the last few years, you know that there is a massive teacher shortage across the nation. Districts in all areas of the United States are facing numbers that a lot of them have never even come close to seeing before in terms of teacher vacancies heading into this new 2022-2023 school year. Historically, over about the last 20 years or so, national vacancies have sat right around 10%, meaning that 1 out of every 10 teaching positions across the nation has been vacant at any given time. even that number is higher than it needs to be. Obviously, ultimately, we would like to get as close to 100% positions filled as possible, but 10% has kind of been the standard over the last couple of decades. Going into this school year, nationally, we're sitting at just about 13%. So when you look at the sheer volume of teaching positions across the nation, that 3% increase is huge. That is a lot of open positions that districts just aren't prepared to deal with. And as much as that is a scary number to think of, you've got some school districts, especially your large urban school districts. Some of them are looking at 25 to 30% vacancies as they head into the new school year. And I just don't know how a school district functions when somewhere between a third and a fourth of their teaching positions are not filled. For example, the greater Houston area, which is comprised of about 18 school districts across Houston, Texas, they are entering August, they had 3,400 open teaching positions. So among 18 school districts, 3,400 open teaching positions. The Houston ISD district, the main, city district alone, had 900 vacancies in their school district. Okay, so this is all according to the Houston Chronicle. When you take this kind of, huge number of teachers that are leaving, and you couple that with the low enrollment numbers that undergraduate education programs are seeing across the nation, this is a problem. This is something that we really have to get a handle on if public education is going to survive, the next 1, 2, 3 decades, because this current trajectory it's not going to work. We are losing a lot more teachers than we're bringing in every year. And if these numbers seem scary now, without some sort of, serious, kind of stopgap being put in place, we're going to see these numbers continue to rise. And that's just not something that any of us are prepared for. So in thinking about this, I surveyed teachers that over the last 3 to 5 years had left the classroom for reasons other than planned retirement. So there are teachers that were surveyed that did retire, but those who retired were ones that retired early. They went ahead and decided to take early retirement rather than continue to stay in the profession. And I took that information and tried to compile kind of a top 5 reasons that teachers are making the decision ultimately to leave the profession that they worked so hard to get into. It's no secret, in order to be a classroom teacher, you have to have the education component of it, right? So you have to have a bachelor's degree, you have to be certified. This isn't something that you just wake up one day and go, I think I'm going to be a teacher, and then tomorrow you're a teacher, right? So there was a lot of work that went into them becoming teachers in the first place. So the decision to walk away is not something that most of these people take lightly. So I wanted to look at what was the catalyst, or ultimately, what was the straw that broke the camel's back. This may have been something that they were mulling over for the last few years, and then what was the key issue that kind of pushed them over the edge. So I took that information, and these were some of the things that ultimately ended up being the most common responses, paraphrased, to try to fit into like a single concept. So the first issue, and I saw it over and over and over again, were the constant increasing of expectations from district level, or actually from the campus level up to the district level, and then ultimately to the state level. Over the last few years, we've seen, and few, I say, I use that term very loosely, over the past decade and a half, we've seen a major shift to test results being kind of the the litmus test for how successful a teacher is, how successful a district is. They're giving letter grades to districts. They are tying incentives and compensation packages to test scores. They are really making these standardized tests the focal point of the teaching rather than a vehicle by which to gauge growth. I think most teachers would tell you that they don't have an issue with some sort of checkpoint testing being used as one of many, data points to show their student growth. The problem has become that we're no longer using it as a data point, we're using it as the data point. It doesn't matter if your student showed successful growth throughout the school year. How did they do on this test versus last year's test? You do not have to be an educator to know that some people are not excellent test takers. I'll use my daughter as a prime example, and she probably would hate to know that I'm talking about this, but I am an educator and this is what I do. I relate. My daughter was an honor student in high school. She graduated high school with nearly 20 college hours. Super successful high school student. She had components of her ACT test especially that it did not matter how much work she put into it or how much studying she did. The anxiety that came with that test being like the ultimate determinant of her scholarships or the ultimate determinant of how a college viewed her was more overwhelming than her desire to be successful. So it's not that she didn't know the information. She had scored off the charts throughout her entire high school career. But when it comes time to sit down and take that test by which you will be judged ultimately, these students are dealing with a great deal of anxiety. And sometimes that testing day is their worst day. It's their worst day of the whole school year. So to gauge their success and ultimately their teacher's success on how well they do on a single test, it's unfair to the student, it's unfair to the teachers, and it's unfair to the process that is education. Education is a process. It is a marathon. It is not a sprint. And I feel like we've begun to discredit all of the work that's being done if it does not show on that standardized test. So for a lot of teachers, this idea that no matter how much work you put in, the expectation is always going to be that you do better. I've worked for a school district where our scores for our grade level were well into the 90th percentile. And when you score that well in a content area, then they start to pick apart the other things that the state grades based on. So it's, well, where's your growth? Well, how come our highest achieving students aren't growing? How come our lowest achieving students aren't growing? And it's like there's this constant moving scale of what success looks like. 95% of our students are, quote unquote, passing this standardized test. Well, now we're going to move down to the next pin. Why aren't you doing well enough in this? And so you can never truly succeed as an educator because they're just kind of moving the finish line. And I'm not placing that blame on campus administration or district administration. They are only carrying out what the state departments of education and ultimately the federal Department of Education are setting as the standards for success. You know, we are all being graded on what the, education department is saying is the standard. And so ultimately, it's changed the way teachers are teaching. They are teaching to score well on the test as opposed to teaching a well-rounded approach to learning. You know, students are becoming better test takers, but are they becoming better critical thinkers? Are they becoming more inquisitive? Are they understanding what they're learning, or are they understanding how to beat the system? And so I think for a lot of teachers who got into it for the right reason, based on this feedback, it just seems like they weren't able to teach the way that they thought it needed to be done. And they had to go against their own beliefs of what it meant to be a teacher in order to maintain good standing on a state level. The second, which kind of feeds into the first, was the workload component. If you have talked to a teacher, especially over the last 3 school years, since the pandemic took hold and there was this transition to virtual learning, and then ultimately a transition back to in-person learning. In 2020, a lot of work got put on the plate of teachers to develop a delivery of their instruction that could be utilized virtually. The students still needed to learn, so the teachers were being kind of tasked with creating lessons that could be delivered via the internet. They were taking all of their lessons that they were planning on delivering and having to rework them in a way that was technology driven. And through blood, sweat, and tears, that was accomplished in that first year. And I think a lot of teachers stepped up to the plate because they knew what needed to be done. And I'll say this as a former teacher, but I'll also say this as a parent. Almost any teacher you come in contact with is willing to go above and beyond because they truly believe in doing what's best for the student. Like with any job, because this is not unique to teaching. With a lot of jobs, when you go above and beyond and you push yourself to your limits, it becomes the expectation. And that's exactly what happened these last few years in education. Teachers showed that they were capable of planning twice as much. They showed that they were capable of producing twice as much content, and then it became the standard. So a lot of teachers have lived in a perpetual state of exhaustion for the last 3 years because they're still expected to differentiate for their different level learners. They're still expected to collect data so that they can make sure that they're adjusting their lessons to meet the needs of those students. But now, because it's been shown that they can create lessons that students can do from anywhere, the expectation has kind of become, well, hey, make sure that you're providing the students who missed class with an opportunity to get all of the same information virtually. And make sure that, all of the deliverables that were available online during the pandemic, that those are still there for parents to be able to help with students outside of the classroom. And again, teachers want these things to be available for their students because it's in the best interest of the students. But there are only so many hours in the day. And so when you're constantly creating all of these deliverables and you're meeting your deadlines on lesson plans and you're delivering the in-class instruction, but also being available to, provide feedback on the online component. At what point are you supposed to spend time with your family or eat dinner? You know, it becomes, you almost feel guilty anytime you take a moment for yourself, because the expectation is that you will do all of these things because we know you're capable of doing all these things. And it almost becomes incentivized to kind of sandbag, for lack of a better term. And I don't know many teachers who are capable of sandbagging, honestly. If they know what's in the best interest of the student, they're going to push themselves to act accordingly. And so it kind of creates a tough position, because they're going to do the work, but then they're going to resent the amount of extra work that they're having to put in. And ultimately, there's going to be a breaking point. The next key issue, and this has been something that has been brewing for a while, but we've really seen it probably come to a head the most in these last couple of years. And that is some of the behavior issues that teachers are facing with students. You've seen a lot of social media challenges where students are encouraged by their peers to act out, destroy school property, try to do something outlandish in the school setting. And they ultimately kind of feel like there is no real consequence for this kind of behavior. And, it's tough, because nobody wants to make school punitive, right? Like, I'm not interested as a teacher, and maybe I shouldn't say nobody. Again, there's exceptions to every rule. I don't know many teachers who get a kick out of reprimanding students. Most of the teachers that you talk to would tell you that their day would run incredibly smooth if they didn't have to worry about classroom management issues, right? If students took the approach that the information they were learning was beneficial to them, and that their active participation in class was beneficial, it would make things a lot easier on everyone involved. That's just not the case, though. What teachers are wondering, myself included, whenever I was in the classroom, is we have policies. We have student codes of conduct. We have, district level behavior policies that are in place. For most districts, every district I ever worked for, you require the students and the parents to acknowledge these policies when they sign the handbook or the student code of conduct or whatever it is. So the policies are in place. They're in writing. They've been developed by your district's legal team or whoever's responsible for that. And then when it comes time to carry out those consequences for actions that are clearly and explicitly written, a lot of times the follow-through is not consistent with what policy clearly states. And so teachers begin to lose faith in the system. If I am doing what I'm supposed to do in terms of reporting student behavior, where are the consequences? And for a lot of districts, you've started to see sort of an implementation of, I don't know if red tape is the right word for it, but a process for writing referrals that is so convoluted and multi-stepped and complex that a lot of teachers just end up giving up on the idea of even following through with the referral system. X number of parent communications have to be made, and written, documented, that the student did this on this date and this on this date and this on this date, and that you've had X number of one-on-one conversations with a student to where it might be the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th time that the student has created an issue in your classroom before even the first level of a behavior consequence comes into play. And when you're dealing with a classroom of 30 students, you just don't necessarily have the time to go through all of these processes. So you end up bending. You end up just saying, okay, well, there are certain policies that I'm just not going to care about anymore. And then once you start doing that, the line continues to move. And what started off as, I don't care if the student, is 30 seconds late to my class. Now it's, I'm not even writing a tardy when they're 2 minutes late to my class or 5 minutes late to my class. I'm not writing a referral whenever the student went to the restroom and was gone for 20 minutes or never came back to my class, because they're going to have to do it 5 times before anything comes of it. And so it's created this sort of apathy amongst teachers, and it's created a sense of comfort amongst students where they know that for the most part, you're not going to follow through with it. And it's a tricky spot to be in. And so the question is, what can districts do to adhere to these policies in a way that gives students an opportunity to have a little wiggle room, but not so much leeway that they're effectively getting away with everything. There has to be some common ground there. You don't want to be unreasonable with how strict you are with the policies, because ultimately they're going to make mistakes. But there also has to be a hard line drawn somewhere where educators know that the administrative team has their back on discipline issues. And then, the one that probably gets talked about the most, but interestingly enough, was the 4th most popular response, and that is compensation. And when I say compensation, we immediately jump to teacher salaries. But there are so many different aspects to what compensation entails. Yes, salary is a key piece of, how teachers are compensated, but benefits play a huge role. It seemed, and without going back and verifying year over year, I honestly feel like my health benefits coverage as an educator got more expensive every single year that I taught. Now, I understand that inflation is going to happen over time, costs are going to rise. The problem is that teachers operate on a fixed salary scale. And it is not based on anything to do with your merit as an educator. If I'm a year one teacher, this is what I'm making for this school district. And then year two, I'll make this, and year three, I'll make this. And no amount of extra work that I'm going to put in is going to change where I stand on the salary schedule. And a lot of times those year over year jumps can be as little as about $500. Now, to put that into perspective, if you're making a $40,000 a year salary, then a $500 raise is less than a 1.5% raise. So whereas a standard raise for a lot of professions is about a 3% annual raise, you're making less than half of that, and there's absolutely nothing you can do to, exceed that. So whenever you are adopting a new health plan year over year, and the cost of that health plan is going up, and sometimes it's not even going up enough to cover your yearly increase. There were years, and this is, a fact. You can go and, fact check it. There are years that teachers will actually take a pay cut just to be able to keep their health insurance. And there are only so many times that you can do that before you say, why am I going to keep doing this? The next part of the compensation, umbrella is this kind of incentive to professionally develop. I was fortunate that of the 3 districts that I was an employee of over my time in public ed, 2 of them offered at least some compensation for an advanced degree. So if you're unfamiliar, which if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're in education, in which case you're probably not unfamiliar. But for the sake of argument, education is one of those few professions where there really is no opportunity for advancement without some sort of academic component. So if I'm a classroom teacher and I want to move into, like an instructional coaching position, a lot of districts will require some sort of specialist certification or perhaps even a master's degree in a specific area to be a coach. So that's, moving up one rung on the ladder. Then if I want to go into administration, even if I've been a classroom teacher for 20 years and I've shown great leadership qualities, there is no avenue for becoming an administrator in a public school without a principal certification, which is also a master's degree with a certification component. Beyond that, superintendent, anything, basically every level up is more education. So in order to do that, you're spending money out of your own pocket to potentially better yourself professionally. There's no guarantee. Like I have 2 master's degrees, and when I left public education, I was a classroom teacher. So you could spend the money in order to obtain those degrees to provide yourself the opportunity to potentially down the road get some sort of higher level position within the school district. But it's going to come out of your own pocket, and you're taking all of the risk because there's no guarantee that the job will come. Now, as I mentioned, 2 out of the 3 districts that I worked for offered a yearly stipend for master's degrees. I believe both of them were $1,000 a year for any teacher who had a master's degree. Now, in theory, that's a decent bump, $1,000 a year on top of whatever your incremental salary increase is. But then when you break it down and say that the average teacher, if you're teaching to retirement, you're probably teaching 35 years, roughly 30 to 35 years. And say you are 10 years in before you secure your master's degree. So 25 years of teaching left. And it takes you anywhere from $10,000 to $15,000 to get that master's degree. Well, now all of a sudden, you're seeing that $1,000 stipend might have equated to $15,000 to $20,000 total in additional income over the life of my career. And when you look at it that way, you begin to wonder, if I'm not guaranteed upward mobility, and I'm not really going to reap the financial benefits of getting this degree, what's my incentive for doing it? And especially now, where you probably have more classroom teachers with advanced degrees than at any point in history. I mean, everyone seemed to have a master's degree, at least every veteran teacher that I was working with. And I obviously, again, not everyone, but a large number of the teachers that I worked with had master's degrees. So at a certain point, you're not even setting yourself apart anymore with that advanced degree. You would effectively have to go and pursue a doctorate or multiple advanced degrees, whatever it is. And then you're definitely not going to reap the financial benefits of doing so. So health benefits are expensive. Not a lot of reward for furthering your own education. And then, of course, the salary component. Teachers across the country are earning about 20% less, and this is according to the Learning Policy Institute, earning about 20% less than individuals holding the same level of degrees in other fields across the country. For those that are in the middle of their career, and this is where that tiny incremental year-over-year increase comes into play, that number jumps from 20% to 30%. So, 15 years into your career, with the same degree as somebody working in a different field, you're making 30% less than they are. So why wouldn't teachers be incentivized to use their education to go work in a different field? You have to feed your family. You have to be able to survive. And I've heard a lot of people saying, you knew what you were getting into, all teachers care about is the money, and they're all complaining about the money. And I don't think that's an accurate representation. I think none of us get into education to get rich. What you don't understand when you're getting into the profession is just how much of that already tiny salary will kind of be diluted before you actually even see any of it. When you're paying into your teacher retirement account, which most people can't afford to live on once they retire, and you're paying for your health insurance and your benefits, which, again, offers less than desirable coverage for a pretty high premium. And then a lot of teachers are spending money out of their own pockets for classroom supplies, snacks for students, all kinds of things. Your actual bring home, once it's all said and done, is sometimes barely a living wage. And yes, you can say, well, if you don't like it, you can go find another job. That's exactly what they're doing. Teachers are going and finding another job. And if that doesn't scare you, it should. Because if we're not putting a premium on the importance of our children receiving a quality education, then I don't really know what else to say. For me, and yes, I'm coming from a background of being a teacher, but when I'm looking at it strictly as a parent, because I'm not in the classroom anymore, I want to do anything I can to help my student's teacher be as productive as possible, because my children are the ones that are benefiting. The last thing I want to do is encourage my kid's teacher to go find a different career. I don't see how that is productive, or how that could even possibly be your initial response when teachers ask for a more favorable treatment. So, how do we fix it? Of all these issues that we discussed, what can districts do to create better opportunity for teachers? Well, when it comes to like the cost associated with being a teacher, so whether that's, getting an advanced degree, whether that is professional development, supplies for the class, the districts can start to partner with other organizations, schools, service centers in their area, to provide the education they need for their instructors to be as productive and successful as possible, but in a way that creates a pipeline that continues to funnel into those other organizations that they're partnering with. One of the things that we've seen, and I actually worked in a district that did this, and there are pros and cons to it, but this idea of creating like a high school career pathway or a grow your own program where the high school will partner with universities in the state or in the area, or whatever it is, and the high school will actually pay for a portion, or the district will actually pay for a portion of that student's education, with the agreement that that student comes back and teaches in that district for a predetermined number of years. In that regard, it's a mutually beneficial relationship, because a new teacher can come into the profession with less debt than they would have otherwise, been leaving with. And the district can spend less money in their recruiting processes because they have a steady pipeline of new teachers coming in to replace teachers that are on their way out. Will this fill every vacancy? No, but it begins to bridge the gap. The same can be done with advanced degrees. You've got teacher candidates that are excellent leaders in their classrooms, whether they're department heads or grade level chairs. They've shown the district that they have the necessary skills to be excellent leaders on campus. You pinpoint those potential candidates and you provide them with an avenue to obtain their degree through these same partnerships with universities and local colleges. And in doing so, on the back end, they return to your district and fill necessary either administrative roles or kind of some more auxiliary leadership type roles. And again, it's mutually beneficial. How do you keep good teachers from leaving? One thing that you can do is be more deliberate in the way that you recognize good work that is being done. Be more deliberate in the way that you acknowledge the teacher's skill set. When a district hires a teacher, or really any employee, there is an understanding that the district believes in that person's ability to do what they do as a professional. And somewhere along the way, that trust seems to go by the wayside, and teacher autonomy begins to go out the window. Trust that these teachers are doing what you hired them to do. Let them know that you believe that they are the right person for the job and that you trust their judgment. And then ultimately provide them with ways to work the district's policies and, state level mandatory standards and things like that into their own autonomous way of teaching, as opposed to creating kind of a carbon copy curriculum that every teacher should deliver, because that's going to take away my motivation. It's going to take away my creativity, and ultimately it's going to take away my desire to continue doing this thing that I used to love. What you can also do is try to always be very aware of the overall morale within the campus walls. Whether this means creating, campus improvement teams or, some sort of committee that is given absolute judgment-free reign to be open and voice their concerns and speak on behalf of their colleagues, with the understanding that the district will do anything in their power to create a positive work environment for those teachers. You have to listen to the voice of your staff. You have to listen to the concerns of the people that are tasked with delivering the content. And you have to keep a constant finger on the pulse of your campus or your district. It's very easy when the teaching is going on in the classroom and the leadership is going on in the front administrative offices for there to be this disconnect. And a lot of times teachers are afraid to voice their concerns. They're afraid of retaliation. They don't want to be seen as the complainer. So administrators can be very deliberate about creating a safe space for educators to really be open and communicate, so that the two sides can work together to try to compromise. Neither side is ever going to get everything that they want. And there shouldn't be a winner and a loser in the decision-making process, because ultimately, if it's combative, or it's, if there's an adversarial relationship between administration and the educators, the kids lose, because it's going to create an inconsistency. And for the students to be as successful as they can be, there needs to be a real consistency from the top down. So, give teachers an opportunity to voice their concerns, really hear what they have to say, and then try to put processes in place that are reflective of those concerns. You can improve teacher working conditions by incentivizing these professional development situations. Provide teachers with opportunities to select things that they believe will be beneficial to them as an educator. Provide opportunities for teachers to have a role in selecting district-wide curriculum. I've worked in districts that seem to adopt a new curriculum every 2 years. Well, if you talk to most teachers, they'll tell you you're never going to effectively be able to teach it because it takes a year for the teachers to learn it, and then you're only giving them a year to deliver it before you're adopting something else. So having teachers play a hand in the decision-making processes will create a more invested work environment, in my opinion, and based on the feedback that I'm getting, that ultimately is going to lead to better results for everyone. And then for teacher compensation, keep in mind what it takes to sustain a household in today's economic situation. So just because the state sets a bare minimum that you're legally allowed to pay teachers, doesn't mean that districts should be striving to stick as close to that number as possible. And I will say, you're seeing a lot fewer, at least here in Texas, a lot fewer districts that are paying, at or near state minimum. You've seen a greater increase in salaries going up. There are federal programs in place, especially for lower income school districts, where there are resources that will help attract and retain quality educators. And this is coming, again, from the Learning Policy Institute. If districts are seeking to cut their costs, a major cost is staff recruitment. And if you're constantly having turnover, then you're constantly having to recruit. So instead, let's focus on putting the money into the solid teachers that you already have in place and working to retain them, as opposed to just seeing it as a foregone conclusion that you're going to have huge recruiting numbers year after year. Let's really incentivize growing and developing as an educator and give these teachers a reason to remain with the same district long term. Let them know that they're taken care of. Let them know that they are supported and they're cared about. And not just from a financial standpoint through their salaries, but by, finding resources that would allow for classroom supplies, finding funding to offset the cost of their health benefits, really focusing on creating opportunities for internal advancement instead of constantly looking for your next administrative, team member externally. give them a reason to believe that if they work hard and they put in the effort and they seek out the education, that they have a chance to put back into the district as a leader what they've given to the district as a teacher. And I think what you'll see is a lot of people are looking for a reason to stay in the profession, not a reason to leave. Of the people I talk to, they stand by their decision. But most of them, as a matter of fact, I believe it was about 80% of the people that were surveyed said that the biggest thing is that they're working somewhere that they feel appreciated now. Now, they didn't elaborate. Yeah, that could mean they're working somewhere where they're making substantially more money, and so they're feeling adequately compensated, and that's what makes them feel appreciated. But they were very clear on the fact that they feel appreciated, and that was a game changer for them. So, by no means is this, again, an exhaustive list of the reason that teachers are leaving. Everybody has their own unique circumstances. But these are things that continue to come up over and over and over again. And we really just have to work together as educators and leadership to find ways that can work within the financial restraints of the school district, because let's not pretend like school districts are overflowing with money and they're just choosing not to pay teachers, right? They're having to be very selective about where these dollars go. But making sure that you're cutting out any unnecessary expenditures to be able to make sure that the classrooms are fully supplied, that, teachers have the support staff necessary to help them be productive, and that they really do feel appreciated. You'd be surprised what a provided lunch once a month or something along those lines would do to boost morale. I mean, it's something. When you feel like the only time that you get recognized is for a week in May during Teacher Appreciation Week, it weighs on you. Because as a teacher, you do get to hear a lot of negative. You get to hear a lot of parents, a lot of community members, complaining about, what goes on inside the school building, when really they're not the ones that are inside the school. They don't necessarily know what's going on day in and day out. I think ultimately we all want, and when I say we, I mean teachers, leadership, all district personnel, want what's best for the kids. And I think what's best for the kids is consistency, and not seeing a new, influx of unfamiliar faces year in and year out. So we really have to find a way to alleviate some of these stressors that are causing teachers to walk away. As always, please feel free to share your thoughts and feedback with the community in the episode forum at talkoftheclass.com/forum. This is where I also will share any additional notes or any other feedback that I get from the survey. More survey responses will continue to trickle in, and just because they don't make their way onto the podcast doesn't mean that I can't add that information to the forum. Again, don't forget to follow and subscribe to the YouTube channel at youtube.com, where the Talk of the Class podcast. Thank you so much again for your support. You can always reach out to me at talkoftheclasspodcast@gmail.com to provide any suggested topics that you may have that you'd like for me to cover, any guests that you'd like to recommend, or if you yourself think that you have something to add as a guest and you'd like to come on and talk about whatever topic is really important to you. I'd be happy to have that conversation with you. Again, that's talkoftheclasspodcast@gmail.com. Thank you again so much for supporting the show. The numbers have continued to grow week over week, and I really am having a great time doing this. So, I would talk to myself if 3 people were listening or if 3,000 people were listening. This is something I'm passionate about, and I want to kind of get the information out to the masses. So thank you for helping me do that. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will see you all again next week. Thanks again.